at that point we can start. So thank you all for taking the time to come today, particularly given the slightly hidden location of this room. Certainly this morning when I got here I tried to find it. The doors were locked, so it took me a little while myself. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name's Chris Pym. I've been with ACS for about 3 years now. Prior to that I was working for PubMed Central and Spring Nature. So I've been working in open access in one way or another for over a decade now. My role at ACS is I work with research funders, trying to understand what they want publishers to do and trying to work out ways that we as a society can fulfill those mandates that are in place. And obviously, given the Nelson memo from a couple of years ago, that has featured fairly high on my agenda for the last few years. So what I'd like to do today is quickly to talk through how ACS are trying to support our membership base and our author base in terms of managing those public access mandates that have been put in place. And a lot of what I'm talking about today, while specifically looking at federal funders, is also based on experiences that we've had through Europe with the Coalition S funders that have similar mandates in place. So to start off, I figured that I'm probably teaching people how to suck eggs, but I'd introduce ACS. So we're one of the world's largest membership societies, certainly in the sciences. We're the largest organisation within chemistry. We're based in Washington, DC and Columbus, Ohio, but we also have offices around the world, as you might be able to tell. I'm based in the UK, but we also have offices in various other geographies around the world. I work not for the Society, but for the Publications division of the Society, and we publish over 90 journals. We publish 6 peer-reviewed book series. And in terms of looking at what our output is like, we get around about 250,000 submissions a year. We publish between 75 and heading up towards 80,000 articles this year. So we're large for a society publisher, but we're certainly not on the same scale as some of the large corporates in terms of the output that we have. So where are we now? All US federal funders will be implementing their public access policies no later than December 31st this year. And unlike the previous Holdren memo, that includes all federal funders, not just those with a budget of over $100 million. So everything from the National Endowment for the Arts through to the NIH at the other end of the scale. And the main requirements that were outlined in the Nelson memo are that researchers are required to upload the accepted manuscript no later than the date of publication. They're also now required to provide public access through to the data that underpins that, with the usual caveats around data doesn't have to be shared if it's patient identifiable information or if there is intellectual property associated with it that could be otherwise in some way harmed by the nature of sharing. Many other non-federal funders have comparable policies in various different ways, so we could look at the update to the Gates Foundation's policy from last year, where they're now saying that they mandate the sharing of a preprint, but certainly the gravity around funder mandates globally seems to be around immediate open access as far as possible. One of the problems we have with this, though, particularly in the US, is that author awareness around this is not great, I think it would be fair to say. So we are trying to support authors in terms of understanding the responsibilities that are being put on them by their research funders. So just to put this into a timeline, just over 3 years ago, the Nelson memo was published, which outlined the requirements of the then Biden OSTP to federal funders, instructing them to carry out these changes to their policies. By the end of last year, all of those funders were required to have published a draft of their policies. and that was due to come into effect no later than the 31st of December this year. But as I'm sure many of you in this room know, that the NIH decided to throw a curveball at us midway through the year, and on a little over 2 months and 1 day notice, they accelerated the implementation date of their policy, and that caught us and researchers and librarians and everyone else in the scholarly communications ecosystem very much on the hop, because we weren't anticipating that coming through until the end of the year. Publishers have responded in a variety of ways. So many of the large corporate publishers have been quite open and have said that the route to compliance is for gold open access. And certainly, if you look at most of the policies, APCs and comparable charges are considered to be an allowable expense by most federal funders. Some publishers, notably in humanities and social sciences and other less funded disciplines, are allowing zero embargo open access without an APC. And we, as I'm sure many people in the room know, introduced a third option between the APC and immediate green open access without charge, which is essentially a green APC. So it charges for the services rendered up until the point of editorial acceptance, so that author-accepted manuscript can be placed into a repository immediately on publication. We retain the version of record, so we are able to defend our subscription base to some degree, and at the same time, the services up until that point of publication are covered through a payment that is a lower cost alternative to an APC. So within that framework, what are we doing to support researchers? The first thing that we did is, as I've mentioned already, we were surprised to learn through a press release that NIH was bringing their policy forward. And so we understood that our researchers were also very likely to have been unaware of that acceleration. And so we temporarily sponsored the ADCs for all of our submitting authors through to the end of August. So we get a 2-month window for people to come to understand the impacts. So we're communicating with authors to provide them with information around that. Alongside that, we're continuing our primary undergraduate institution agreements, which are for institutions that subscribe to the full package of ACS journals. They will be upgraded effectively to a read and publish agreement with no additional charge. And that's really to recognise the fact that even in universities that don't have large postgraduate programmes, there is still good research that is published, and often those researchers have considerably less access through to grant funding and other sources of information that might allow them to pay an APC. As we spent that 2-month window, my colleagues that work on the account management side of things with libraries around the US started working to transition institutions over from a traditional subscription through to what we're calling a read and green rather than a read and publish agreement. And that essentially means that for the single payment that you would have with a subscription, where the output and the payment match, no additional charge, or a token additional charge, we've been able to transfer over 100 US institutions over onto an agreement that provides them with a compliant method for their researchers to publish and to meet their mandate requirements. It means in the US we've now got about 650 agreements, either through Read and Green, through primary undergraduate institution agreements, and through Read and Publish agreements. So we're actually beginning to get coverage in the US that covers a significant portion of our output. I believe that we have agreements that cover over half of our publishing. And we're continuing to negotiate more deals, either Read and Publish or Read and Green, with institutions around the US and of course beyond, in order to bring that number up ever higher so that individual researchers don't need to bear either the administrative burden of managing payments of APCs, ADCs, and the various other approaches that different publishers are taking, but also the financial burden where possible, so that they're not having to use grant funds in order to cover individual charges, even where those charges are acceptable per funder mandates. So, how does this green APC work? I think there's been quite a lot of confusion over this, some of which I would take personal, well not personal, but I understand why. There is some, I'm not going to be entirely on the hook for that. But perhaps we didn't communicate brilliantly when we launched the ADC. It only applies to articles that go on to be accepted, so this doesn't apply to articles that are rejected from publication. And so in that way it is very much like an APC. Authors can choose to publish the version of record. If they're at a Read and Green institution or they've elected to pay an ADC, they can upgrade to an APC for the difference in price between the APC and the ADC, so we're not charging both at any point, it's an either or. And authors are able to apply liberal licenses to their author-accepted agreement at their discretion. So for those funders around the world that demand that Green Open Access is licensed under a CC BY license, that isn't a problem. The author-accepted manuscript can be published as such. In terms of what it covers, I think that this is one of the things that librarians tend to understand where the costs lie more than researchers. I've heard many times from researchers that all you do is put a PDF up online, but of course there's a lot more to publishing than just that. So it covers all of the pre-acceptance activities that we undertake. And that would include everything from community development, author support. One of the big ones at the moment, and a growing issue I think for all publishers, is research integrity. As we see increasing volumes of paper mills, and as we see increasing use of AI, this is very much a cost that publishers have to bear. It's nice to see that publishers across the board are collaborating on that, so we're part of the STM Integrity Hub that allows us to, for instance, without needing to look at an individual author, we can detect if multiple publishers have received duplicate submissions of the same article, which is often a sign that there is something slightly fishy going on there. And then we can investigate with individual humans looking at papers to try and find out if this is an error or if there is perhaps something more untoward going on. And beyond all of that, we also continue to bear the cost of the peer review management infrastructure that we have in place. So in terms of maintaining submission systems, maintaining our relationships with our editors, in terms of providing them with stipends in order to support their work for us. So from that, we launched about a year ago the first of our Read and Green agreements, which was with the French National Consortium, Couperin. And it works in a way that is comparable to a Read and Publish agreement, where we offset the cost of the anticipated green APCs against the subscription charge. And that way we can repurpose that subscription money in order to support the mandate for immediate open access through the green route. Benefit of that is that it offers a lower cost per article, particularly when you consider that our Read and Green agreements cover an unlimited number of publications. So unlike a Read and Publish agreement, where quite often for the library there is a relatively onerous task of trying to manage the number of credits or tokens or whatever an individual publisher chooses to call them, in order to make sure that you don't run out of publishing midway through the year. I know that certainly in the early days of Read and Publish agreements, this was a problem, and institutions would find themselves in October having run out of tokens and then having to manage that process when an author thought that the APC would be covered, only to find out that it won't, which is clearly not in our best interest because it's a terrible author experience, but it's also very difficult for libraries with straitened budgets to manage. And as I've touched on before, as with the individual payments, if there is a read and green agreement in place at an institution, individual authors can choose to upgrade from the green approach through to gold open access and immediate open access through our journals for the difference in price between the ADC and the APC. And all of this is managed through a single fee for institutions that's based on subscription, spend, and their output. So depending on the level of output, there may need to be some financial uplift in terms of actually covering that. The flip side of that being with the primary undergraduate institutions, where they have low output, but we will provide that gold open access for them at no additional charge. What about the benefits? From our perspective, trying to put ourselves in librarian and researcher shoes, the simplification of compliance is a large benefit because it is something that we hear time and time again, not just in the US but around the world, that actually managing funder mandates becomes ever more complicated, particularly as you find research that is supported by multiple different funders who have different expectations, trying to navigate that stack of different policies that don't necessarily harmonise. It provides unlimited coverage, so again, as I said, no need to manage the use of tokens within an institution. We've seen through our workflow over 80% uptake in the 2 European consortia that we have. So we're not seeing researchers concerned that this is going to impact on them in terms of having to make an additional payment. Certainly in France, the agreement that I mentioned with Couperin, I think we're at 92% uptake of the agreement now, so 92% of the output from those consortial members that have an agreement with us are now publishing immediate open access through the green route, which is, for France, that is the preferred route. France spent a huge amount of money in terms of developing AL, which is a national level repository for research publications. And so they have focused on green over gold, and this provides a route for them to manage that in a simple and straightforward way, and without needing to spend time and effort that could otherwise be better deployed in terms of monitoring the usage of those agreements. The other thing that we looked at with this is the question of global equity. So historically, ACS have been part of various different approaches around equity. So we have on the fully open access journals, we have our waiver policies, which we don't ask for people to request a waiver. If you submit from a country that attracts a waiver, that is applied automatically. The same is now true for the green APC. So if you publish in JAX as our flagship journal, and you come from a lower income country, we'll automatically waive the charge for that. And one of the benefits of that is that we now have a route towards immediate open access for developing countries across all of our hybrid and our fully open access titles. So we have a route whereby if there is a researcher from a low income country that needs to make their work immediately open access, regardless of the journal that they publish in, there is a route for them to do that. On the flip side of that, so on the subscription side of the agreement, we remain part of Research for Life, and so we offer discounted or free subscriptions to those countries as well. So we now have a route whereby both the read and publish in low-income countries is available without charge for those countries that find themselves in more difficult situations than those of us in the global north. In the US, obviously things are moving relatively fast at the moment around what's happening, and I won't go into the whys and wherefores of that. But as I've already mentioned, we historically have been sponsoring Gold Open Access to primarily undergraduate institutions that subscribe to our full journal portfolio, giving those institutions, again, a route to both read and publish. And from next year, where individual graduate students have seen their funding and the potential for them to complete their studies cut off because of changes in federal funding, we're offering 100 grants to PIs of $25,000 to sponsor students, graduate students, to help bridge gaps caused by the changes in federal funding. But as I mentioned at the start, there's also the data component of this, which again, we are also working to try and support. We launched last year a service in collaboration with Dryad as a data curation service, effectively, that supports researchers in being compliant with those funder mandates. It's a general purpose chemistry repository. We appreciate that for crystallography there are already well-used databases and repositories for data in existence, so we're not trying to replace those. We're trying to offer a place where chemistry data can be uploaded and made public by researchers where there aren't community norms already in place. And that is intended to support researchers in sharing their data and in terms of reusing existing data. This is very much in the same mould as ACS's work with ChemArchive in order to provide a preprint server that does the same things, and now we're working with a variety of other chemistry societies around the world, including the Royal Society, the Japanese and German chemical societies, as well as the Chinese Chemical Society, to support ChemArchive and to grow that so that there is that very rapid mechanism for the sharing of research. So we've called the new service that we've launched Chemistry Data Bank. We have evidence that in terms of benefits, there is evidence that suggests that where both data and an article is shared, that it boosts citations. So as well as the altruistic benefits of openness around trying to solve huge sustainable development goals, there are also the more selfish benefits to individual researchers that will remain as long as citation is considered a currency in terms of reward and recognition. We've set up the service now with one of our journals, Organic Letters, where the service runs alongside the manuscript submission service so that both can be done at the same time, and we'll make sure that the data is opened up when the article is published. Again, trying to make sure that the workflow for individual researchers is as smooth and simple as possible, and we're planning to widen that out to other journals as time goes by. And really the idea behind this is to ensure that sharing data isn't just a ticked box. I know that with all of these mandates there is the potential for the requirements of a funder to become just another chore to be done with the least amount of effort put into it. So we're working with Dryad, as I mentioned, to provide curatorial support for those data sets in order to maximise the fairness of those outputs. So to summarise, ACS is seeking to minimise the financial impact of the Nelson Memo on our researchers while maintaining our financial sustainability. We're working with institutions, particularly in the US at the moment, but also around the world, to repurpose existing subscription spend to offset costs. And we continue, as a society, to develop new tools and services to support the chemical sciences in terms of maximising the exposure and the sharing of knowledge amongst the scholarly community. Thank you. I will now